Okay, so we're going to jump right into Maya. We're already there, and you can see I've created a box already. So I'm going to click on the inputs of Polycube so you can see what the numbers are. But you're going to go to Create Polygon Primitive Cube and the option box. Click on the option box, and then when that comes up, you're going to plug in these numbers. You're going to have a width of 8, you're going to have a height of 10, a depth of 3, and then 1 each for width, height, and depth divisions. So that gives you a box that's 8 units tall, or excuse me, 8 units wide, 10 units tall, 1 unit deep, with only 1 polygon on each side. Okay? And I'm going to close this. And then the only other thing I did was I clicked on the box, and on my translate Y value, I put in 5 so that it would come up and sit right on the grid. When it's created, it's halfway above, halfway below the grid. Putting it in as 5 unit translate Y, it pops it up onto the grid. Okay? So the first thing we want to do, we're going to put a texture on this, right? This was, Maya just created this box, so what's the surface on here? What surface is on this box because Maya just created it?
Light gray stone.
What's the surface called?
Lambert.
Lambert 1,
Lambert.
right? Do we change Lambert 1 ever?
No.
No. So we have to assign a new material. So I'm going to right click to bring up the marking menu. Come down here to assign new material. That brings up my material picker. And I'm going to assign a new Lambert surface to this. I'm going to click on that. And then that takes us into the attribute editor. And I want to click on the Lambert 2 tab. That's going to bring up our...
Wait, you want us to click on Lambert?
for the surface, yes.
Oh.
And then once you have the Lambert 2 applied, go to the Lambert tab in the attribute editor, and we're going to change the name from Lambert to box, or whatever you want to call it. Call it Fred if you want to. It doesn't really matter. But you want to change the name. When you're working with a lot of different surfaces in a scene, it's a really good idea to change the names as you go, because as you start compiling and adding surfaces to your objects, you end up with 10 different Lambert surfaces and 12 different Phong surfaces and a handful of blends. And then if you need to make adjustments to those, if you haven't changed the names to reflect what they're applied to, it's hard to figure out which one is which. So always change the name to indicate whatever it's being applied to. So I'm going to box. All right. We could change the color of this, but it's not going to matter because we're going to apply a texture map to this, and the texture map sits on top of any color information that's there. The way we're going to do this, that map you just downloaded off the Canvas site, we're going to go ahead and apply that map to this box. The way we're going to do that, next to the color attribute, there's a little checkerboard, a little 4-squared checkerboard. Click on that checkerboard. And that gets our Create Render Node window open. And these are all the different render nodes that we can have, all the different kinds of surfaces that we can apply to our object. Things like bulge, checker, cloth, those are what we call procedural textures. Those are programmatically created. They're done with math. And you can set the parameters. You can have for the cloth, for example, you can have a really fine weave or a wide weave. For the checkers, you can have big squares or little squares. You can have rectangular squares. And color on all these can be changed. They're terrific. The thing that's really great about procedurals is they change as they go through an object. So once you apply a procedural texture to an object, like let's say a marble texture, right? If you have a picture of a piece of marble and you apply it the way we're about to apply this, the edges sometimes will have stripes, just vertical stripes, because the edge of the texture comes to the edge of the object, it goes straight down through the object, so we only see those pixels that are on that edge. With a procedural texture, it's all math, so it changes based on its W coordinates. Here we go back to the W. The texture itself changes, so once you apply it, it's got a nice, they all connect up, all the pixels connect the way they should, and we don't have to worry about it striping. So that was basically just vamping to make sure everybody got their box built. So, and we're on this picker. So we're going to go to create render node, and what we want is the one down here that says PSD file. PSD stands for Photoshop. We're going to click on PSD file because that's what we're going to be loading in. And it takes us to the PSD file texture tab. A little ways down under file attributes, you'll see a field labeled image name. And that's where we're going to plug in the name of our file. We could type it in with the path. We're not going to. Yeah.
Does it only take Photoshop images? Or?
The PSD, if you click on PSD file, it will only take Photoshop images, yeah. But you can use, are you asking if Maya only takes?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. You can use JPEGs, you can use PSDs, or PNGs, you can use really any type of file that's an image file. You can put anything. Just in this case, we're using a PSD.
Yeah.
So next to image name, you'll see this little folder. Let me see the folder. That guy right there.
Yep.
I'm going to click on that folder, and that's going to bring up my browser and let me open a file. So I put my file on the desktop. I assume you did as well.
No.
No? Well, wherever you put it is where you need to navigate to. Mine's in this folder right here, and I'm looking for the file called UV lesson. So wherever it got downloaded to in your, when you downloaded it is where you want to go. And I'm going to hit uvlesson.psd and then open. And that's going to plug it in here. And now the texture is on my box. Doesn't it look great?
Yeah. I love
Fantastic. So how do I know the texture's on the box? I've got the sample right here. It shows that the texture is in place. We can't see it here because we need to change a setting over here. In our view window, or in our window view, we're going to go to View. Oh, sorry, Shading. My bad. We're going to go to Shading, and then we're going to come down to Hardware Texturing and click that so that it gets checked. And when you click Hardware Texturing, you should see something that looks like this, which is our texture in place.
That's beautiful.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
We're done! Yay!
It's a new dinosaur.
Not even close. So, why does it look like this, you might be thinking. Remember the rabbit I showed you? The rabbit texture, or the rabbit model with the UVs all piled on top of each other?
Oh, yeah.
When Maya creates a UV for a polygon, UV shell for a polygon, it does it based on how that object was created. Okay, so even though we created this as a rectangular box, we used polygon. What do we use to create it? Polygon cube. What's characteristics of a cube? All sides are the same, right? So even though we specified that we want this to be taller than it is wide and wider than it is deep, Maya didn't care. Maya said, I'm creating a cube, so if we look at the UVs for this, and I'm going to come over here, I'm going to right-click on my view picker, this area right here. I'm going to right click and select two panes side by side. Everybody with me on this?
Wait, 2 panes side by side.
Two panes side by side. And that creates 2 panels here. And then in the second panel, the one on the right in my case, I'm going to click panels, come down to panel, and then go to UV editor. And there we are. If I click on the box now, there's my texture in place in the UV space.
Wait, how do you do that?
I don't remember.
Oh.
You're going to go to in the second panel. You're going to go to panels, panel, and then UV editor.
Panels. Oh, okay. Panels.
Panels,
Okay.
panel,
Panel.
UV editor.
UV.
Now it's a little bright at the moment. I'm actually just I'm putting my cursor in that view and I'm gonna tap it to take it to full screen. It's a little bright, it's hard to see, yeah.
Mine's a white and black.
Because you haven't clicked on the object yet. Sorry. Oh. Yeah, no, you're fine. Tap the space bar. So now we have two views now. Click on that. Right. Click on the box. There you go. I don't know. Your box started selected, so that's why you're go ahead and reselect it. You good? Okay. Right, click over here. 2 things side by side. Over here, panels. Panel. There you go. Click on the box. Then click on the box.
Strange. So that's why I always, I mean, yeah, I always just try to.
This is that part of the video where there's really nothing going on. Yes, sir. Oh, click on the box. Just click on the box.
Mine crashed on me.
Oh dear. Yes.
Mine just keeps coming out of the flat.
It is a flat. You have to go into the shading. There you go. Yes, sir. Shading. Hardware texture. There you go.
Does it matter if I'm in side X view?
No, because all you're going to do is just go tap this.
I don't know if I want to redo it.
Oh, okay.
Tap the space bar. And now go to panels, perspective,
Yeah, I mean,
cursor.
Oh,
Tap it again. Tap the space bar again. There you
oh,
go.
okay.
And this is going to be, you're going to change shading to hardware texture to show your
Shading.
shading.
Oh, shading.
Hardware texture.
Hardware. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay, so if your box doesn't have your texture on it, Remember, you have to go to shading, hardware texturing in the view, in the window that has your box. That was in English, right? Everybody's looking at me like, what? Okay. All right, so our texture is in. It's a little hard to see what's going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dim this down a little bit. See this button right here? You see this? There's a button here that's highlighted. It's got like a couple of triangles for mountains and a little circle for the sun. Right below it is one that's got some slashes through it. I'm going to click on that, and that's going to dim things down a little bit. It'll make it a little easier for you to work. So it's at the very top of the UV window. Go ahead and click on that button. Right there. Click on that. And it's going to dim it.
Wait, I really can't see it.
Right there. Okay? Gotta go panel. Panel. There you go. And then right there. Yeah. Hang on. What? That's because you're not an object. Right click. Right click on your object.
So let's say I scale this.
Down click on it.
That's gonna blur.
Don't worry about it. We're gonna project them anyway. That's all.
Thank you.
So we did.
You need to go to your editor.
So we do. Right over here.
You got it. Yes.
Okay, so where was it?
Yeah.
It's yours is go. You need to go full screen. This is the problem with having a small screen. Yeah, it's
Space bar?
tap. Just tap.
Ah.
Tap the space bar. Right there.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
We all good on this side? Okay. All right. So here are UV shells. There's 6 of them because there's 6 sides to your box, right? Notice anything wrong with them?
Yep.
There, I mean, that right now is a cube that looks like this. It just got unfolded and laid out flat. The aspect ratio, this the size of these does not match the size of the panels. So we need to fix that. By the way, I wanted to mention real quickly, the way that we're doing this is absolutely the opposite of the way that you would normally do it.
Oh.
Normally, you would lay out your UV shells, take a copy of that as an image, export it out of Maya, bring it into Photoshop, paint your texture map, and then bring it, go back into Maya, bring the texture in, and apply it to the surface. And then the texture would just apply. But we're doing it this way because this is a great way to kind of understand how all of this works. But just be aware that the way we're doing this right now is the absolute backward way to do it. You don't paint a texture map first and then bring it in and go, well, this one goes here and that one goes there. But this is a great way to kind of figure out how to size them and put them back together and all. Yeah.
So I can create anything on Photoshop. I can create all my textures and then just apply it on Maya, right?
But you do your UV layout first.
You really, yeah.
You do the UV layout first, and then I'll show you how to export it when we get to that part.
Okay.
It's really simple to do. It's literally a menu item. Just go, and you tell it how big to make it, and then you get an image that can go into Photoshop and you just paint over the top of it.
Yeah. So what about different textures? Like, if can I apply JPEGs and
Sure.
things? And,
Sure. Yeah, there are advantages to working in Photoshop. You can, with a Photoshop file, when you organize it correctly, you can keep all the attributes for all of your textures in one file. So you can have the color map, you can have the bump map, you can have the specular map, you can have normal maps. All of that can be in one Photoshop file. And then you can bring that Photoshop file in and assign different folders to different attributes of the surface. So then when you make it, if you have to make a change, you go into the one file, make the change, and then it automatically populates back into the Maya file. If you do separate image files, you do 5 different JPEGs, let's say. You have to go back into Photoshop anyway, make those changes, export new JPEGs, and then those will get updated in Maya as well, but why take the extra steps?
What's
All right, so what we need to do here is we need to turn these UVs into shapes that more closely match what we see in the texture map. And the way we're going to do that is with a projection. Okay, so you need to be in the modeling menu set, right? So over here on the left, if it doesn't say modeling, click on the arrow pointing down and go to modeling. And then we're going to go to UV right here at the top.
wait, UV? Where's mine always missing?
Are you in the modeling tool set?
Yeah.
And you can't find UV?
Yep.
It's spelled UV.
UV.
Yeah, you gotta hit this thing right here. See those double, the double arrows.
Oh.
You gotta hit that.
Oh,
Right
okay.
there.
I just press on.
Hold on. So, so in the UV menu, we're going to come down here to automatic and then the option box. So modeling menu set, UV, automatic, option box, click on that, and we get some options. I'm going to make this just a little bigger because we got to adjust a couple things. So this first field up here, planes, this is how many planes Maya is going to look at this object from to determine what the best angle is to project the UV from. So Maya is going to take a look at this model and look at all the faces from however many planes we tell it to and decide which of those planes best represents the face that it's looking at. Okay? So we got a box. What's the lowest number of planes we can use to project these UVs?
1.
Right now we got 6.
3.
3. 3 is absolutely right. We get a plane in the front, we get a plane at the top, we get a plane at the side. The one in the front picks up the front and the back. On the top picks up the top and the bottom, and the one on the side picks up the sides. Okay? We could do it from 6, one from each side, but that's a little overkill. Not necessary. So we're going to hit this drop down, switch to 3. We could do 12, but that'd be ridiculous. And then the other thing we're going to do down here, on shell spacing, right now the default is 0.2. We're going to switch that to 2. And what this is just how much space there is in between each shell once it's projected. And the reason we're doing 2 is because it will make the shells actually the right size. Okay? So once you've got your plane set to 3 and your percentage space set to 2, go ahead and hit project. And look at those. Aren't those nifty? I'm going to click off so they're a little easier to see. So now we've got the same 6 UVs, but they're now appropriately sized. Right? They're scaled correctly for the front and the back and the sides. Yes, sir. close and let's go. Maybe automatic. 3, 2. What's going on? Are you in an object mode? Make sure you're in object. Make sure you're selected. Right. There you go. You were in object mode. Yeah, when you do this, ladies and gentlemen, you have to have your model in object mode because Maya is looking at it as a whole object. Okay. All right. So this is kind of cool. We've got everything sized correctly. The only problem is they're not connected together anymore, and we don't know which one's which. Right? So what we want to do is now we're going to go ahead and reconnect these in a way that looks like our texture map. We're going to take our front and attach the top and the bottom and the sides, and then we're going to take our back plane and we're going to rotate it a little bit so that everything matches up. So we don't know which is which, but we don't need to know because Maya does. Okay? So I'm going to come down here. You can see that right now I'm selecting as UVs because when I roll over one of these, it highlights the whole thing. I want to connect these back up, so I want to select them as edges. So I'm going to right-click over any of the UVs, doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to go to Edge. And then when I roll over edges, you see that the edges highlight. Now, I'm rolling over this edge here, but the one below it and to the right is also illuminating. Why?
Was they connected?
They're connected. That's the same. It's actually the same edge. Those are both one edge. They're disconnected at this point. So when you move these and stick them back together, Maya will always move the smaller UV shell to the larger UV shell. So we're always going to start with selecting the larger and then connect them up. So I'm going to come up here to the top edge of this one, just because I like the way it looks. I'm going to select that, click on it, and then I'm going to come up here to polygons in the view menu. And I'm going to come all the way down to move and sew UV edges. And what that command will do is take the small one, move it to the big one, and reconnect those two edges so that it's now a larger shell.
Wait, so polygons and what?
Move it, it's right up here, man. Move and sew UV edges.
Oh.
And then when I let go, this smaller shell moved from here and reconnected to the larger shell. So now we have a slightly larger shell that we can move around easily. Okay? If we look at our texture map, we see we got to attach the sides and the bottom. That's easy enough to do. This is where keyboard shortcuts are your friend. So I could click on this edge. This one over here highlights as well. And I could go back to polygons, move and sew UV edges. But that's a lot of mouse mileage. The last thing I did was to move and sew an edge. So if I click on this edge and I just hit what key? Say loud, say it proud.
G.
G. If I hit G, there goes that shell. Moves it over there and connects it. Same thing at the bottom. Click on that, hit G, it moves that shell down. Click
How
on
do you
that.
move it if it gets to like the?
Don't worry about it. We'll get that in a second.
Oh.
First things first. And the final one, click on that edge. G, moves it over. Okay. Now I'm going to reduce my my window here. You can see that the look of the box has changed. Right before it was the duck on the side on that face, and now it's close to what it should be. So Jason said, well, how do you move it if it gets below that 0011 space?
Yeah.
But I know that's what you meant. You didn't say the whole thing, but I know that's what you meant. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to right click. I'm going to reselect shell. And then I'm going to click on this large shell. Now, watch up here before you follow along because this is kind of, you're going to, ooh, I promise you. It's gonna, ooh. Ready? Here we go. I'm going to select this guy. I'm going to get my move tool, same move tool you use in the 3D view. Hit W. I'm going to grab it in the center here. This only moves on 2 axes. It only moves on the X and the Y because it's a 2D space, right? Everybody with me on this? We laid this out flat. Here we go. Ready? It's going into place. Click and hold. Drag. Come on, ooh for me, would you? There, look at that, huh? Yeah, okay. Now it's sarcastic. Just a little too long. But we take the shell and we move it up and we put it right on top of that box.
Sorcery, I tell you.
There we go. And so the only thing we have to do now is our back piece, because the other 5 pieces are in place because we sewed all those edges together. To get this one in place, get it where it needs to go, I'm going to click on the shell. And I've got a couple of rotation buttons up here at the top of the UV window. One's counterclockwise, one's clockwise. I'm pretty sure, yeah, clockwise is the way I need to go. Each click turns at 45 degrees. So I click that a couple of times. It's now oriented at 90 degrees. I can take that shell, move it into place over the back. All of our UVs are now where our textures are, and our object looks like this. Everything's in place. I got a couple little seams here because I wasn't really super careful, but that's easy enough to fix. If I went back here and zoomed in a little bit, I could get my shell again. Go shell, grab this, just move it down a little bit so it's sitting a little more directly on the texture, and just kind of move it around until those little white edges disappear. There we go. How about that, huh? Look at that.
How do you have them side by side like that?
This is that two pane side by side that we did at the beginning.
Ah.
Tap the space bar. You'll get back to
yeah.
your 2.
Okay.
What if one of my shells stuck to others, and the one which wasn't supposed to?
Oh, you can separate them. You can do edge and select the edge, and then where is it? Yeah, split UVs down here at the bottom. You select the edge where they're connected, and then hit split UVs. And then when you grab the shell, it separates that out.
Does this really not have any trans fat?
I beg your pardon?
It doesn't have any trans fat?
Any what?
Trans fat?
Yeah, because it's virtual. There's no. If you look at the nutritional information, the only thing that's in there is irony. 101% of irony of your daily requirement of irony. 101%.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you please repeat on how you merge rectangle?
Oh, the rotation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How you merge
It looks like you've got a whole lot more than 6 shells there. Yeah. Yeah, to rotate, you just select the shell, right? And then you use these 2 buttons right there. So one goes counterclockwise, one goes clockwise.
Oh, is that it?
That's it.
Is it?
That's it. Now, if we wanted to take this texture map out, I'm going to turn this off real quick. Let's say that you did this the right way. And you laid out your UVs, and you want to take this texture map out so that you can bring it into Photoshop and paint it. You would go Polygons, UV Snapshot. the very bottom of the polygon menu, UV snapshot, and then you're going to put the file someplace where you can find it. It automatically sends it to the project directory, to the out UV directory. I'm just going to go ahead and put it on the desktop so I can find it easily. And we'll call it box UV. The thing that's important here is the resolution of the texture. The default is 256 by 256 because I guess Autodesk figures it's still the, you know, the late 80s. Nobody does textures that small anymore. So I'm going to take it to 2048. It will always do it as a square. Your textures are always going to be a square because we got the 0, 0 to 1, 1 space, right? It's a square space. My IFF is not a good format to take it out in. So I usually switch it to something like JPEG or Targa or what have you. So at 2048 as a Targa file, I'm going to hit OK.
Nope.
Must select a valid object. I didn't do that. Let's select the object. There we go. And I get a note, users can animation tab, desktop, boxuv.tga. I go in here, there's my texture. And if I put it in Photoshop,
You open that also in Illustrator? You just flash.
typically you wouldn't do a texture map in Illustrator because you need a texture map is a raster image.
Oh,
It's pixel based. There it is. I know it's a little hard to see. I'll zoom in.
Wow.
But that's our UV.
Huh.
And if I, grab a brush here real quick, pick a really obnoxious color, and grab a brush, and just kind of, we'll put a little something on each side.
Demonic symbol.
And then over here on the back, we'll do this on the back. I did that all in the background. Bad Paul.
You have to do this professionally.
I'm going to back this up. All right, never mind. We will just step backward. There we go. Never a good idea to paint directly on the background like I just did. Always throw in a new layer. So there we go. We'll do that again. There's that. There's that. There's that.
Apparently, these are the best duck-shaped crackers ever.
There's that. And then we'll do some stripes here. And I'm going to throw in another layer underneath it just for a background color. Again, something deeply obnoxious. Whoops. Bad Paul. There we go. Right? I'm not sure why it's doing that. I should get rid of that. There we go. That's better. Like, better? Better than what? All right, so there's our texture map. File, save as, and we will call it, make it a Photoshop file, box UV, bad. How about that? Save. All right. So we've got our Photoshop file done. Now we have to do is get our box right here. We will go to our attribute editor, find our color channel for the box, click on this, and we can go to image name again, hit this this folder, go to the desktop, box UV bad. Look at that. My terrible texture is now on my box. And everything is exactly where I put it because I use the UVs to paint the texture map. That's normally the process you would use. Is you lay out the UVs first, then paint the texture map. Okay? Questions?
It didn't help.
Okay, I'll come help you. Yes, sir.
I'm still on the issue of merging the screen.
Yeah, it looks from here like you had more than one
Okay.
polygon per face or polygon per side. So that's part of what's going on there. So we'll have to take a look at that. Anybody else?
Oh.
Yes, sir.
I can't get the UVs to split, so all the boxes.
Okay, I'll come help you with that.
Maybe two.
All right, I come in. Any general questions that don't involve your specific? No, we're good there. Okay, it's just help. Okay, no problem. That we can do. So really quickly, while the video is still recording. So here's the assignment. It's due next week. Complete the box UV texturing tutorial using the handout. It's the website. There's a web link. And the PSD texture file provided. If you want to change up the texture, you want to have a little bit of fun with this, you want to turn the ducks into, I don't know, zombies or whatever,
Onions and
feel free to do that. If you don't change the PSD file, if you just texture mapped your box, don't worry about uploading the texture because I already have it. If you change the texture, mess with the PSD file, please upload it because I want to see what you did. It's always fun to see. I got a really terrific one last year. And once you're done with this, you want to start surfacing your models and your props. They can be solid colors if you want to texture map them. By the way, just like we did with that other object where we grabbed part of it and placed a material on it, you can lay out your UVs for only a portion of your model. There's another tutorial I have to put up because somehow it didn't get uploaded. Yeah, you don't have to lay out all the UVs for all of your object. If you're only going to have texture on a small portion of it, you can just lay out that small portion, create a surface for that portion, and then do the texture map for that. So those are your tasks. The only thing you're handing in this week is your box, your UV laid out box. That's the only thing you're turning in. You can turn in the PSD if you change the texture, and then your MA or MB file for your scene. And that's due next week. Next week we're going to talk about blend shapes. We're going to start talking about setting up ways to deform our characters and our objects so that we can get some animation in them. We're going to talk about deformers for a couple of weeks. It's one of the main ways that things get animated. Anytime you've seen a Pixar film or the Minions, if you're into that, things like mouth shapes, arm movements, and things are all done via deformers. And there's different types, and we'll get into that. So I will now come around and help everybody who has individual issues. And feel free to check this out once it gets uploaded. It should be later this evening.